my question is Plexis. Okay, it's a twofold thing. There's two components in there. The impact of the bright cap and the bright cap value. Well, we've spoken about this before, but I think it's a really fascinating thing and what it does. And also the cathode follower has to do in terms of like, one, what it is and how it contributes to the character of that old Marshall sound, because it's something that like a Mark Series amp doesn't have. And I'm curious as to how big a factor that is in that characteristic, like rasp.
Yeah, totally. So the bright cap thing, let's do that first. It is the most common mod for old Plexis that I've had in here, and I've had a lot now actually that have come through. You know, a lot of stuff through the 70s. I actually just posted a video a couple of days ago. I had a
so good
66, 67.
I watched that this morning.
JTM 45 transitional. Yeah, that was a special, man. That was like, I took photos of that and sent it to Dave actually.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. We'll talk about the Dave stories in a sec, but because he's been in more old Marshalls and we've had hot dinners, you know, like he's a great reference of like, you know, man, check this out, you know, and just verifying the age of all of that and so on. But the bright cap is the most common mod that's happened to Marshalls over their life is to have the bright cap cut out. People call it, you know, clip it or snip it. Mostly they've just been soldered out and taken out, right? That one component, because of course mostly people find them horrendously harsh and bright, and they just go, I just can't deal with it. And then they get the bright cap taken out and they go, oh my God, now I can kind of use the volume, because a Plexi is a non-master volume amp, right? As we know, right? It's just got one control, and that's, if you think of it like a 2203 or 2204, you know, JMP or JCM 800, they were the kind of the first real master volume amps that Marshall did. And then all of a sudden you had a gain and a master volume. Well, a Plexi is like having the master volume on 10 and then just using the gain control as your volume. That's all you've got.
Yep.
That's all it is. You know, because there is no master volume. It's just like not even there. Master volumes are positioned almost always as the very last thing in the preamp before it hits the phase inverter. And the phase inverter is you got to think of the phase inverter as part of the power amp,
right? Even
though the phase inverter is a preamp tube,
and you can have post phase inverter masters as well.
You can,
yeah,
and you'll only kind of see those in a Plexi, I can explain the reason for that too when we get there. Back to the bright cap. So in around about kind of the late 60s and then into the early 70s, Marshall started to use a 4700 picofarad bright cap, which is it's a high value. Like, you know, if you think about the JTM 45s had a bright cap, 100 picofarad. You know, and that's just this bit of sparkle on top. Like you can hear it, and it's like a nice airy kind of sparkle on top. In the treble channel, the normal channels never had bright caps. You think about, you know, you got the treble channel and the normal channel, and then, you know, people wanted more aggression, more distortion out of these things, so they started to release these amps with 4700. So it's nearly 5,000 picofarad,
nearly 50 times the value.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's the experience you get in an old four-holer when you plug into the treble channel and you just crack the volume on and it goes, poof. It just like straight away, it's just loud. And you just go, fuck, you know, like how do people use these things, right? The only way to use them is that you've got to bring the volume up, because the bright cap is so large that it's letting through all of your high end and then into the mid-range. Right? Whereas a much lower value bright cap, so like, you know, 100 picofarad, 250, even 500, you're getting a nice top end, but the volume is still kind of workable. You know, as you bring in the volume, the bright cap has less and less impact.
Yep.
It's basically a big high pass filter.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if that's sort of what it does.
It's basically exactly what it is, right? It's a cap and a pot, and all a pot is a variable resistor.
I was going to say, so it's an RC network.
Yeah, exactly what it is, right? And if you actually think about how the bright cap is wired, it's wired between the input to the pot and the wiper, which is the middle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you can imagine the pot has 3 lugs on it.
Yep.
It's got the input, the wiper, and then the ground. And the bright cap goes between the input and the wiper. So as you move that pot, you're changing the position of where the wiper is. You're changing the resistance that's in parallel with that capacitor.
Mm-hmm.
And when the resistance is 0, the cap has no impact.
Yep.
Because if the resistance is 0, then the audio signal goes all the way through that path.
Yep.
And the cap has no impact. 0 resistance is when you put the pot on 10. Right? Maximum.
It goes through.
It goes through. Cap has no impact. Now, as you start backing the pot off, the resistance is getting higher and higher, and so more signal will be shunted through the cap.
Mm-hmm.
And the cap basically has a cutoff point, a frequency cutoff. And so you choose the value of the cap to where you want that cutoff point to be in the frequency spectrum. And 4700 is back to the Marshall value is high, so the frequency cutoff is it's lower. It's in the mid range.
Right. Okay.
And
which is, to me, one thing when I think of like a driven JTM 45, which I own a JTM 45 and I really like it, but it's definitely not a Plexi. It's got a totally different thing going on. It's like creamy sounding. That's the way I would describe it. Whereas a Plexi is like kind of interesting, because I think like a lot of guitar players think they know what a Plexi sounds like until you play one.
Yep.
And then you're like, I didn't realize it had so much gain.
Oh yeah.
We spoke about that yesterday. Like,
yeah.
It's like what some of these things you just like what you get from a YouTube video and the experience of seeing in front of an amp and dialing it in is very, very different. And
it's a whole different animal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so with that level of bright cap, you need to get the volume up to about 6 for it to sound good. Because anything lower than that, the bright cap is having too much impact, and it just sounds. There's no bottom end, there's no kind of lower mids or whatever in the signal. And so it's at that point that the amps become, not unusable, but then you get into like, I need an attenuator or a power station or a post-phase inverter master, like you mentioned, Leon, because 100, anyone has tried it, right? 100 watt Plexi on 7, man, it's a blunt instrument, The cathode follower, so in a standard Marshall, like a 1959 Super Lead Plexi or a 1987 JTM 45, all that stuff, and even into the 2203, 2204 era, they always have 3 preamp tubes, don't they? Always 1, 2, 3. In later years they got more adventurous, right, with all kinds of shit going on. But good old Marshalls are 3 preamp tubes, and one of those is the phase inverter. That's V3, if you like. V2 is always where the cathode follower is, and it's one side of V2. And all a cathode follower is, because people use the term a lot but probably have no idea what it is. It's people.
There's 2 of us here that have no idea, plural, yeah.
You have to stop me about going too far in the weeds here. But
Please keep going. I need to know. I need to know.
Do you want me to tell you like what it is? In a 12AX7, there's 2 gain stages or triodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. People talk about gain staging, how many gain stages, blah, blah, blah. No one knows what they are, probably. But inside a 12AX7, there's 2. And they're identical, and you can use them however you like.
Right.
And each triode only has 3 connections, wires, right?
Yep.
3 connections that's needed to make it work. It has the plate, sometimes called anode, often just plate. It has and I'm drawing it like this because that's how you'll see it on a schematic. You'll see the kind of the plate resistor, or the load resistor, it's sometimes called, kind of at the top, and you'll see the triode kind of symbol, and then there's a cathode resistor. So you got the plate and your cathode resistor, and then the grid, and the grid is the input, right? You can think of the grid, it's your guitar signal hitting it.
Okay.
So your guitar signal is an AC waveform, like an audio waveform. Yeah, it's AC, and that grid is like a tap. It's controlling the flow of electrons through the tube.
Right.
The grid is that. It's exactly what's all it is, right? And by doing that, you're amplifying the signal because you're taking a small control grid signal, which is your guitar, and making it into a much larger amplitude, much larger voltage by running it through this triode or this gain stage, plate resistor, cathode resistor. And then you need to figure out, once you've done that, and you go, okay, I've amplified my signal, fantastic. How do I get it out of there so I can then move it into the next part of the circuit?
Yep.
And there's this crazy mix of DC and AC voltages that coexist at the same time, right? On a tube stage, on a triode, because people talk about plate voltage.
Yep.
You hear this B plus plate voltage, blah blah blah. That's the voltage that's sitting at the top. So you've got a ground, in the circuit ground. The cathode's connected to the ground. You've got the plate resistor connected to the B plus, which could be 300, 400 volts DC. And then you've got your amplified signal. Now I need to get it out of there. The way you do that is through a coupling capacitor.
Okay.
The coupling cap, I'll get to the point about cathode followers in a second.
Keep going, mate. This is great.
Yeah, so the coupling capacitor, which looks like one of these, you go, is a Synergy.
There you go.
Mustard cap, like that. That allows the guitar signal, the amplified guitar signal, to pass through it, and it blocks the DC.
Yep.
Okay.
Right? DC can't pass through a capacitor because it's like capacitor's like two plates, if you like. But it allows AC to travel through. Now, in all non-cathode follower, let's call it normal gain stage setups, this coupling capacitor is connected up to the plate resistor at the top. And when you look at a schematic for a guitar amp, you'll see this. You'll see all these lines coming off the top of the triode. That's called plate fed.
Okay.
And you hear about plate fed tone stacks.
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what that is. It's coming off the top. And the Mark series, all the Fender stuff, and Mark series amps and so on, even the early 5150 EVH.
Interesting.
Marshall Silver Jubilee amps.
Oh, okay.
Which is that's the bedrock for the Wizard stuff. The Wizards are all based on the
I've heard that before,
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
They're all plate fed tone stacks.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and it is interesting because Marshall kind of went like left field there, right? Moved away from what they'd been doing. Now, when you take a signal off a plate, it's a high impedance signal.
Okay.
And this is important because when you feed a high impedance signal into a tone stack, you'll lose a lot of signal. It's lossy.
Right. Okay.
And tone stacks are passive. They're just passive networks, in guitar amps. I know you can have active EQ, right? But let's talking about the kind of the Marshall stuff here.
Yeah.
So what a cathode follower is, it's exactly the same setup, but rather than having the coupling cap come off the plate, it comes off the cathode at the bottom.
Okay.
That's called a cathode follower because it's off the cathode resistor. And the difference is that it's now a low impedance signal.
Okay.
So it can drive through a passive network and hardly lose any signal.
Right.
It's the exact same reason why effects loops and amps are a cathode follower on the send.
Right.
And then a gain stage on the return to get the signal back up again.
Right. Understand.
Because you need to push a low impedance signal out across an effects loop. Otherwise, you'll get signal loss and the loop will be like a tone sucker. Where the tone stack is in the circuit will impact whether it actually makes any difference. Like I saw your video, Leon, on how to dial in a Mark series amp was awesome, which is like, okay, I understand that this tone stack is very early. It's not going to work like how I might dial in like a dual record or whatever.